Well, we are here for the first episode of the very self-indulgently titled The Chris Macpherson Show. I'm told it's not too self-indulgent, but we've run with it anyway. It is a real exciting piece to be launching this and bringing some sporting content to the broader landscape of Australia. So looking forward to getting amongst it. It's going to be a new show covering off on plenty across a broad realm of sports. Tonight we're going to dig into a bit of soccer, a little bit of cricket, and a little bit of Formula One racing, some contextual and fiery topics at points. I'll have a few co-hosts to join me along the way, and we'll certainly be looking to keep you up to date with some semi-informed and semi-relevant and semi-serious opinions on a few different topics. So we may as well get things underway for the first episode, and let's talk all things soccer or football, the round ball game. And it's not a better co-host I could have than Lachie Avil from Round Ball Australia to dig into the Socceroos as our first point of call. Lachie, a man who's consulted with me on this, and you're one of the ones that's semi-responsible for the naming, but great to have you on board, mate.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, you and I have talked plenty about the round ball over the last year or so, and that's been a lot of fun. So, yeah, keen to branch out a little bit with you here.
Yeah, we'll certainly spread our wings as we roll through it, and we're looking forward to it. And look, let's start with the Socceroos, Lachie. It's an area that's close to both of our hearts. We're both fairly passionate about, and I better get this right with you on here, football. Lots of the Australian public will be happy to go with soccer, but I know you'll call me on the technicality. The Socceroos, a new coach. We had a dismal start to qualifying. On the premise overall, are there promising signs under Tony Popovic?
Look, the answer absolutely has to be yes. We're coming last night. We played against Japan away in Japan, a fixture that the Socceroos have never ever won in a World Cup qualifier. They, for a long time in that game, actually looked like it was possible that they could have got that result, but it ended up finishing 1-1. Look, a point, if that was offered towards the Socceroos before the game, they would have snatched their hands at it, especially when they were delayed getting to the ground because of a traffic accident on the way. They only arrived into the stadium about 40, 50 minutes before kickoff, despite both the Football Australia and the Japanese Federation asking the AFC to postpone the fixture, a request that got completely, bewilderingly denied. So, incomplete preparation, new coach, new team, new setup, and somehow the Socceroos managed to get a point off Japan, which no one else has done in World Cup qualification so far in this cycle.
Well, you touch on that. I mean, you look at the Socceroos' record in Japan. They've never actually won in Japan, full stop. As you say, they don't have a great record of taking points from Japan. Japan are one of the powerhouses of the qualifying region. The concerning piece for some, though, will be that there was no shots on goal, despite the fact that they got a goal and got away with a 1-1 draw. Is that something? Is the overall result? Are we taking the glass half full version of this?
Oh, I don't know, and that's a stat that a lot of the skeptics of Graham Arnold will probably shout out and say, we've gotten Popper, who's a defensive-minded coach, and nothing else has really changed. But it's Japan away. We've got to be realistic about that. And, one thing that Popovic definitely knows how to do is set up his team very well defensively. And they looked really solid. Japan didn't really have any big chances, which is quite something to say. Obviously, unfortunate own goals both ways that decided this game. But they were really solid. Jason Guerrier, Harry Suter, Cameron Burgess in that back three were absolutely rock solid all game. Lewis Miller and Geordie Boss looked really good going forward, but also had their defensive responsibilities. And then, Luke Bratton came in, who was a controversial pick. He didn't have the best game, but Patrick Yazbek came on at halftime, and his partnership with Jackson Irvine was really solid in front of that back five. So it's Japan away. You got to hunker in, bunker down, and really earn, not quite a clean sheet, but your defensive efforts in a fixture like that. So I think that's a bit of a one-off, and we saw it against China, and I'm sure we'll see it in the next window as well. Plenty more shots on target.
Well, I think the positive is we're almost halfway through the qualifying campaign now, and we're sitting second in that group. We are equal on points with Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. Goal difference does have us there, and again, by any means necessary. We're a long way from danger. We're a long way from safe. But it's certainly trending in the right direction after those first two games, which were horrible. We took 1 point from our first 2 games. If someone had then said, we'll offer you 4 points from your next 2, admittedly China, we would have been confident at home against them. But we'll now get to play Japan at home in the later rounds of this. So it's got to build some confidence for the Socceroos after a rough start.
It's honestly crazy how fast things can change, and that's football and that's sport for you. Because after 2 games, 1 point, Graham Arnold out the door, where all of a sudden we're staring down this game against China, Popovic's first game, and saying, well, if we lose that, you can almost write off automatic qualification. And now we're sitting here 2 games later, we've gotten 4 points, including 1 against Japan, and we are in the top 2, and we're looking towards Saudi Arabia, which is our next game in November, with a lot of momentum, a lot of optimism, and saying, well, if we can win that, then we've got 3 points and head-to-head record over what should be the closest competition for second place in the group, and really going a long way to locking up that second place. So, yeah, it's hilarious, honestly, how fast things can change. A little bit of luck went our way. Saudi Arabia missed a penalty in their game overnight to keep them at 0-0. So a little bit of fortune everywhere you look for the Socceroos. But yeah, at the end of it, we're in second place, which is quite amazing. You wouldn't have thought that was even close to possible a couple of weeks ago.
You certainly wouldn't have. People were calling for not only Graham Arnold's head, and obviously he stepped down, but the 11 to 17, depending on how many numbers you want to draw into it, Socceroos who are wearing those jerseys. So we've kept the core of the same squad. As you said, there's been a couple of different changes that are some forced, some not. That was always going to come. Speaking of changes, this whole Melbourne victory reunion under the Socceroos banner, I'm certainly not ready to pass judgment on it just yet. I had some questions about whether it was jobs for the boys at first, but again, it's one of those things with any of our national sporting teams, the ends will justify the means if they continue to get results.
Yeah, absolutely. If you win, then it's all merry, right? And look, it's hard to disagree with the victory selections he's chosen, right? Jason Gary came on at halftime against China, played very well, played out of his skin last night in Japan, was awarded man of the match for it. Nishan Volupale came off the bench and scored a goal in his debutant game in Adelaide. Paul Izzo, we haven't seen. Daniel Arzani, we haven't seen. So, he's bringing him into a 26-man squad, but he's not forcing him in there for no reason, right? And the 2 that he has brought in terms of Volupale and Guerrier have performed quite well. So I don't think you can really have any complaints.
No, certainly not. I think those old ties too, there was a few people that questioned maybe, jobs for the boys again with the assistant coaches appointments. But again, if you look at those two individuals in Ocon and Fox with their record, I think they speak for themselves as well. They've both been involved and established as coaches and assistant coaches across a lot of different places. So I don't think there's any real issue with those guys there. And again, the ends will justify the means. If the results keep coming, you'll have a very happy football landscape, soccer Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Well, a relatively happy soccer Twitter. That's always a very relative thing. It doesn't take much to upset that balance, and we can dig into that a little later.
Yeah, and look, soccer Twitter loves to complain about something. And when, after a few years of Arnie maybe not going the way we wanted to, got to the bottom of the barrel and, the jobs for the boys line comes out. But at the end of the day, if you're the coach, you're going to want to pick people that you're familiar with and work with and know that you have good working relationships with. That's just how life works. So I think it's always been a bit of a tenuous argument. But again, if Popovic is bringing people in and, as you say, they're getting results, then people aren't going to have any complaints. And then as soon as you start losing, they'll find anything to complain about. So that's just the way it goes.
Well, we'll save some of those comments and drag them back out should the Socceroos lose to Saudi Arabia at home in their next game. But let's move on to the other topic. And speaking of soccer Twitter, it's kind of a nice little segue, isn't it? There's been a lot of outrage on soccer Twitter in regards to Japan versus Australia and the fact that the game wasn't on free-to-air television. We've seen a number of people tweeting about this, a number of people addressing the fact that at the end of the day, it should be, our national team should be on, free to air. It should be accessible to everyone. I know you got engaged in the fun on soccer Twitter. What are your views in regards to, some of these tweets that we're seeing where it's talking about the fact that it's a right, it's an entitlement. It is, the duty of Football Australia to make sure that all of their games that they play in, and, if you read into some of the tweets, even if they play a friendly against, San Marino in Antarctica, that should be televised and provided free to the watching public at home.
Yeah, look, it's frustrating for me because I think when it comes down to it, it's just a hypocritical argument. And I don't think people really know what they're arguing for, because you can say it's the duty of Football Australia to put all their national team games on free to air, but then Football Australia's other responsibility is to provide funding for, the grassroots level of the game. And, that they're earning money by putting these games on streaming services and behind paywalls. That's a fact. So we have the anti-siphoning list specifically because it is a better commercial position for organisations like Football Australia to take their games behind paywalls. And so the home World Cup qualifiers are on that anti-siphoning list and therefore are on free to air on Channel 10 and 10 Bold and whatnot. But then the games that are away in these World Cup qualifiers are not. And it's simply a revenue making tool. And if we want, a lot of these people that are complaining about it on Twitter are also the same people complaining about the financial state of the game. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. I think it's a very reasonable thing to give up a few games on streaming platforms. And it's not even that expensive as well. You look at Paramount Plus, it's not the worst streaming platform in the world anymore. It has had a lot of issues, but it's not that bad. We have pause and rewind. It's relatively reliable, and it's only like $7 a month or something like that. So I think we can all calm down on the free to air issue a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And to be clear for those people, the anti-siphoning legislation is there built to be that happy medium, right? Like they can't put everything on there because all of a sudden all of the providers would then have an issue. They wouldn't funnel any money in. We see it in the rugby league world where, the grand final and state of origin, they're anti-siphoning targets. For soccer, it is every match of a FIFA World Cup tournament involving the senior Australian representative team. So that's nice and clear. If the Socceroos or the Matildas are playing at a World Cup, then they will be on free-to-air TV. The FIFA World Cup final is on there as well. And then each match in the FIFA World Cup qualification tournament involving the senior Australian team played in Australia. So again, it comes back to, and again, they had to draw the line somewhere. We get the access to the home matches. We get the access to all of the World Cup finals matches when they're in the actual World Cup tournaments. And irrespective, and we're, yet to see it happen, but irrespective of whether Australia makes it or not, we get the FIFA World Cup final. I think that's a really good balance, realistically. And when you look through further into the other sports, and we could recite it chapter and verse, but I don't think it gives us any value too. But it gives that whole snapshot of finding a balance, but not hampering a sporting body's ability to generate revenue, which, as you said, is up there with promoting its game. That's a key part. It can't promote its game without that revenue. So, and we've seen it that those away World Cup qualifiers are exclusive to Paramount Plus. It's not like in some other sporting landscapes where, game to game almost, you can have different streaming providers and you need to have 4. As you said, it's $8 a month. There's a good opportunity there. The product is uplifted, and then you get all of the A-League as well, which is great, which we'll dig into in a moment. So the A-Leagues. So yeah, I don't see the argument. And to be fair, I thought it was quite hypocritical, and I couldn't relocate this, but scrolling through X in the lead up to the game, I actually came across a profile, and I was looking, and there's this individual having a shot at exactly as you said, the hypocritical argument of, well, no, we want this to be on free to air, but then they, a day before or 2 days before, were critiquing Peter V'landys of rugby league fame, who is the chairman of the ARLC, the Australian Rugby League Commission, about the fact that he'd done a deal that didn't drive as much money with Nine and Fox to maintain a legacy with the game when they could have got maybe 10 or 15% more by going elsewhere. And it's like, well, which one do you want? Do you want it to be on the cheapest and most readily available and consistent platform that you're used to? Or do you want the most money? Because you're arguing two different sports on the opposite sides of arguments. So I think that probably just sums up sports Twitter in a nice little nutshell, or sports X as we should call it.
Yeah, exactly. It's you can just throw out things without much consequence, so it's a bit of fun sometimes. But yeah, hopefully we can take these conversations away from those kind of platforms and talk about it in a little more depth like this show, Chris. It's good to do that.
Exactly right. It's why we're spreading our wings. It's why we're here. I mean, we'll have some good fun doing it, and look forward to who else we can get to join in the conversation as we go along. We've got a few people up our sleeve that we're looking forward to. Well, it shows that there is absolutely no winning when it comes to the sporting landscape on Twitter. So let's move things along, and we'll turn our Socceroos focus back when it comes time for that Saudi Arabia game. But we will move things along and head to the T20 Women's World Cup. Well, Australia's T20 World Cup hopes continue to advance in the Women's World Cup, undefeated through the pool stages, sitting atop their group. They were the first to lock in a berth through into the semi-finals. And we just do what we keep on doing. Lockie Avil, it's one of those situations where Australia just keep on winning. Our women's cricket team is setting the bar.
Yeah, and they have done for a long time. This is their tournament, isn't it? This T20 Women's World Cup, they've won so many times. They won it in Australia a couple of years ago. Had the privilege of being there for that final. That was a really great match, and it looks like they're in pretty good form here as well. You know, undefeated through the groups. A little bit of a test against India in that last pool game, but through to the semi-finals, which is what you want. And now it's just 2 games to go.
I'm not surprised, mate, that you were at that final. I know how much you enjoy some Katy Perry. You're probably at the AFL Grand Final watching it as well. Geez, she gets a run at the MCG, doesn't she?
She does.
It's a little bit of firework. I can see Lockie dancing to that in the background. But as you say, I think we're chasing a 7th T20 World Cup. It's a phenomenal record for the women. They're continuing on in terms of it. But in speaking of continuing on, and a few of your friends on Roundball Australia will particularly love this little piece. While Australia were undefeated in the pool games, England set themselves up perfectly. They headed into their final game against the West Indies. They didn't even need to win. All they needed was to make sure that they didn't lose too many wickets in losing and still put up a competitive total. They put up the competitive total, but they lost too many wickets. They lost 7 wickets in their match, which put them in a position then when they headed into the second innings where they had to win against the West Indies. And they went from first in the pool in that final pool game for them to 3rd in the pool. Is there anything sweeter than watching an English side choke?
Well, you're not going to get a whole lot of sympathy out of me, Chris, because I'm half English on my dad's side as well. So you probably picked the wrong person to go hard at on this. So I have a little bit of sympathy with Jacob, who you're referencing as our mate from Roundball, who is fully English. Look, I can't say I've always had much of an affinity for English cricket teams. So it does feel good, the Ashes. I'm always on the other Aussie side. Don't worry about that. But yeah, look, first going into the last game, and then out of the tournament is quite crazy. And it shows you the brutal nature of this competition as well, straight to the semi-finals. So you can be, an average or above average team in that 3rd place and miss out on progressing. So it's cutthroat, but, it was in their hands and they choked it. So only themselves to blame.
Yeah, they would have been one of the sides Australia would have had an eye on, and probably, they've been one of the sides that's been there or thereabouts on the heels of Australia in terms of recent World Cups, along with India, who you touched on, that we managed to defeat in that final pool game. But in terms of those semi-finals, it's a new mix when we look at it. Australia being the consistent side there, but they're going to be joined now. New Zealand managed to sneak through and eliminate India with their last pool game win. Things looked a little dicey a few times through the pool games for New Zealand. So our Trans-Tasman rivals are through from our pool as well. But the other pool, it's ended up being South Africa and the West Indies. It looked like it was going to be one of the two of them based on that last result. But as I said, because of the way the cookie crumbled, that's how it matches up. And it's an interesting one. As I said, England and India would have been the two probably, if I'm in the Australian camp, they're the two sides that I'm most worried about. There's now a few question marks about it. It's opened up a little bit in terms of how it shapes up with those 4 teams going through. Australia will shorten as favourites. New Zealand have certainly got some big hitting. We know the West Indies have got some big hitting. We saw that, and we saw some strength against England. And South Africa, we've seen a few of their players come out to the WBBL in recent years and perform really well as well. So it's not what it once was, where Australia kind of just walks through these tournaments. But the Aussie girls, you'd have to think, would be in a pretty advantageous position heading into that semi-final up against South Africa on Friday night, early Saturday our time.
Yeah, you'd hope they'd be feeling pretty good. And you're right. Historically, England, massive cricketing nation, of course, and both the men's and the women's have always been pretty good. India is the team that did play in that final against Australia at the MCG those years ago. So for them not to make the semi-finals is massive. And then you've got New Zealand, who we beat comfortably in the group stage. So you'd imagine that if they did go through to the final with Australia, then the girls would feel confident straight off the bat. And then, you do have the West Indies and South Africa as well, but, they've also tasted defeat in this tournament. So purely by the fact that Australia has that donut in the losses category, I think has to give them a lot of confidence going into the finals.
There certainly will be a lot of confidence, as you say. Like we've matched up well with each of these 3 teams in recent years in big tournaments, including, as you said, New Zealand in the pool games. But there is the big question mark. We've lost Taylor Vlamanik, who is out with the dislocated shoulder, but bigger absence than her. Our captain, Alyssa Healy, we saw her on crutches before the India game. There was talk that she might have been able to play that. She didn't play it. We had players step in. We saw, them step up with the opportunities. We had Lanning as keeper, Harris opening. Our fielding absolutely lit up with 3 key runouts late in that game. Is Alyssa Healy, if she's not fit for the semi-final, is she make or break in terms of Australia's hopes? Or do you think that, we've seen enough from those other players stepping into those roles and, maybe they're a little bit better for the fact that it happened in their penultimate pool game rather than in the final pool game and you're going into a do or die game without having had a test run, if you will?
Sorry, quick fact checked. Is it Beth Mooney who had the gloves?
It was too, yeah.
I think you said Meg
Yeah.
Lanning.
Yeah. All right, we'll go back to
You want to have another go?
Yeah. So in that last pool game, they had the opportunity. Mooney stepped in with the gloves. Harris opened. We saw that she did well with the bat. Is it a situation where it becomes make or break for Australia without Alyssa Healy in there? Or do you think because they've had that test run in the final pool game that they're in a prime position to be able to deal with her absence should she not come up fit?
Yeah, look, potentially, and maybe not even just the pool, but they've had to do it without it before. And this is a side with a lot of creating depth, right? And so pieces go in and out all the time. Obviously, a wicketkeeper is a very key position, but Beth Mooney is more than capable, and they have the depth around her. So it's 11-person team. There's lots of other members that you can lean on in terms of how you get your results. So, of course, it's unfortunate. She's a massive player, massive leader for the team as well, of course. But I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm looking forward to seeing, in her absence, if someone else can take that opportunity. And again, it'll be an interesting situation for the coaching staff if she's not fit and they star in the semi-final. Most would say you can't leave her out, but then, there's plenty of people, and we know we love a cliche, that'll say don't change a winning formula. Only time will tell. As we said, those semi-finals, it is going to be Australia versus South Africa, the West Indies versus New Zealand. Either way, we're going to have a finalist who probably wasn't one of the predicted 3 or so that were going through. Before the tournament, a lot of people were talking Australia, England, India and South Africa. Only one of those 4 will play in the final and one of the West Indies and New Zealand. It's a great story. It's the development of women's cricket. But we will wait and see. There's been plenty that's happened with this tournament, plenty of unpredictability, including the venue itself. We saw it get moved from Bangladesh because of the political unrest. Hopefully everything from here is smooth sailing and we let the cricket do the talking, and hopefully it's the green and gold cricket doing the talking over the next few days, Lockie. We'll wind on from there and we might wrap the T20 cricket with a bit of a go the Aussies and move forward into some more round ball action. Well, let's bounce from the cricket back to round ball action. The A-League men's competition gets underway again this weekend for the 20th occasion. And in fitting with such a milestone anniversary, the A-Leagues have made a real push for nostalgia. We've seen some videos with flashing back to the highlights of the days of Del Piero. We've seen little notes from Emil Heskey and co coming in thick and fast. And I don't know about anyone else, but it's certainly making me very fond for some of the years gone by. And Lockie Avil, I know you're a man who is a fan of the history of the A-League. It feels like it's still a fresh and new league, but 20 years is nothing to sneeze at, and there's some pretty cool moments that have gone through those highlights, even if the APL didn't want to pay for the rights to scribe.
Well, I tell you what, Chris, it doesn't feel like quite a fresh league for me because I've only got a few years in the league itself. So I've grown up with it. That's just who I am and my football journey. But no, it's great to have it back. And it's, the 20th anniversary of the league, as you say, that advertising campaign that the APL have put out going over, and not just like the great football moments, but the great PK League moments, all the memes that people know and love it for. That's how people connect with the league. You got Costa Barbarousas on a bloke's shoulders trying to fix the net at the game. You got Aurelio Vidmar calling Adelaide a pissant town in a press conference. As part of the marketing that the league are pushing out is quite crazy. But no, it's great. It's our league. It's imperfect. It's not the best quality in football. It is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not, top 5 European. But it's ours. It's Australia's league, and I'm very excited to have it back.
As am I. Look, I think you've kind of, and I'm going to bastardise what you just said there, but I think our league is perfectly imperfect, and I think that should be their new marketing campaign, and we'll be happy to take royalties here on episode 1. Now, obviously, as we said, round 1 coming up. It's a new year with a new entrant into the competition, which is going to add some complexity. It's going to add some buys. It's going to add some nuance. It's going to add a new derby. It's going to add a lot, which is the main thing. It's also going to bring in a genuinely established sports conglomerate into the A-Leagues.
Yeah, Auckland FC, part of the ownership group led by AFC Bournemouth in the Premier League. Their owner is Bill Foley, who, has stakes in sporting clubs all around the globe as well. The Vegas Golden Knights just won the NHL a year or two ago, so that's the pedigree that he comes in with. And they're really coming in to shake things up. And, New Zealand football, it really feels like a new dawn for them. Wellington have not won any A-League silverware in their 19 years of existence. Sorry, not quite 19. But since they came into the league, and now all of a sudden Auckland are coming in with a fair bit of money. They've recruited very well some established A-League talent. Jake Brimmer, who's former Johnny Warren medalist. Dan Hall, twice champion with the Central Coast Mariners in the last couple of years. Scott Galloway, stalwart at Melbourne City as well. Some great international players. Hiroki Sakai is obviously the number one name. He's the club's captain. He's won the AFC Champions League. He's played at World Cups for Japan. He comes in with so much quality. And then, of course, the transfer that everyone is talking about is Alex Paulsen, obviously goalkeeper of the year in the league, playing for Wellington Phoenix last season. He comes in, he transferred to Bournemouth, and they've announced his loan move to Auckland. Well, that kind of loan move was still illegal according to the league, and then they changed the rules so he is allowed. But he is here, he's going to play, and it's going to add a lot of spice. And especially after a season where Wellington did so well as well. Like, it really feels like there's two really good competitors that are going up against each other in the Kiwi Classico this year. It's going to be really, really cool.
I'm still not sure I'm sold on the Kiwi Classico, but I agree it's very exciting. And the Vegas Golden Knights, a lot of people question them coming in as an expansion, and you've only got to look at the fact that I think they've won 2 conference championships, 3 division championships, and as you touched on, only sort of just over a year removed now from having taken out the Stanley Cup. So it's they're not mucking about. They've signed well. I think the Paulsen moment is just another one that will go down in the legacy of peak A leagues where we signed off on a transfer that's illegal, but we know the rule's going to get changed, so she'll be right. It's very Australian of New Zealand to have done that. The other thing I like, and they've added a little bit of, they haven't been afraid to go with some overseas talent. They've focused primarily on Kiwi players. You said you've added a couple of Aussies in there as well, with the likes of Galloway. But they've announced, I think it was only today or yesterday, another South American, a Colombian now, to go into the mix with a Uruguayan and a Chilean. So they're hedging their bets across the South American continent too.
They are, and then like a Belgian in there as well to get Europe ticked off the board as well. So they're definitely far-reaching. And one of the assets that we've seen Melbourne City have since the City Football Group came into the league is that scouting network, right? Obviously, their web is flung pretty wide, and AFC Bournemouth maybe not quite the same level, but definitely a lot more so than the other A-League clubs. So they will have known who these players are, and people at Auckland will have requested different kind of profiles, and then they've gone out and they've found these suitable players. So they definitely have probably a higher chance of coming off. Visa players come into the A-League all the time, and they're a bit of a wild card. We never quite know what we're going to get out of them, and Auckland will probably have a little bit of a higher hit rate than most because of that network. So yeah, they've gone far and wide. They've filled up all of their visa spots, which is not all clubs do. They don't have the resources to be able to do that effectively. So that's just one tick in their column before the season even gets underway.
I think the other thing before we move on from Auckland too is this is going to create a great opportunity. Again, we've seen it with Melbourne City with players coming through and Australian talent. Then those European clubs having a bit of an eye because the Manchester City tie. Again, having those ties to Bournemouth, I think that's going to create an opportunity for the New Zealand players to have that same sort of almost pathway if you're starring well there. I don't think it's a coincidence that Paulsen move and all those other pieces that happened to Bournemouth just not that long after Foley had got the licence for the Auckland FC side. So I think it's great. It's going to put more New Zealand talent in the limelight. And again, they've made a commitment, and I think we talked about this when we did the preview for Ramble Australia for Auckland. They've made a commitment to try and support Pacifica players as well, which is great. We haven't seen a lot of them. Dan Hall's gone over there, the Fijian heritage. We obviously have Brian Kaltak, who's leading the Mariners at the moment, of Vanuatu and heritage. So probably an under-tapped resource, but we'll watch this space. Let's turn our attention to round one. And in terms of the way the matches shape up in terms of the fixture, I'm going to take my hat off to the APL and say they've found a really good balance here in terms of some of these fixtures. They haven't overloaded it by making it all derbies or anything else. You're kicking off with a grand final rematch. You head to Saturday night with a Sydney derby. that's a nice core to build on, and you're giving Auckland a home game round one. 2 games in New Zealand to start us actually in round one.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. They've done it really well. There's definitely a portion of people online that would say you don't need derbies in round one because the hype is already there, which in past years I have agreed with to a certain extent, but not this year. And you look at the Sydney derby and you look at Douglas Costa and Juan Mata, 2 European legends of the game coming into either side of the Sydney derby, and you're giving it probably 2 months leeway since those signings were announced to build up to this game in round one. Combank Stadium is going to be close to sold out, if not sold out. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be freaking awesome. And, Saturday night, we're going to have back-to-back games. So we're going to see Newcastle versus City on the Saturday afternoon on terrestrial TV, leading in to the Sydney derby. And, of course, as you say, the grand final rematch the night before. So, no, I think they've done very well with the fixturing. It's going to be a bumper round one. I just wanted to get underway. Oh, it needs to start now, Chris.
Yeah, I certainly can't wait. I'll be dragging myself to the grand final rematch. I'll obviously, as anyone that knows myself and JR, who sits behind the scenes here, we do some work with the Jets for the ground announcing and the match day presentation. So we're looking forward to that. The one thing, and I'm going to be that guy, I'm going to be the person that we complained about before that wants to find a flaw in something that's pretty good. The one thing I'm going to remark on is the fact that every game's either in New South Wales or New Zealand. Hard to be perfect, and we used that line before, and I feel like this line's going to get rolled out a lot about the A-League this year. Perfectly imperfect. It might have been nice to see maybe one of the Melbourne teams, or Adelaide's got the bye, which makes it hard. Even if we had that last game on Sunday at 5 p.m. Sunday Eastern time and played it in Perth at 2 o'clock or something, I'm not sure. And again, I'll use this a lot during this show. If you don't have a solution, you probably shouldn't be bagging it too much, but we'll call it an observation for now. Like it could have been something that would have given Victorian fans a chance, but I'm sure they'll have plenty of chances and there'll be plenty of opportunity. Either way, I'm chomping at the bit as you are. There's 6 really good games here. There's some great stories. We've said Auckland hosting their first game up against Brisbane. I think they're going to get a really strong crowd. Wellington on the back of last season. Western United will head over there, which, we're still not quite sure. Western United, they might be from west of Wellington. I'm not sure. They might get as much of a crowd over there. And Macarthur and Perth, Perth's seen some real changes. Macarthur obviously won the Australia Cup, so it's a big first round. I'm chomping at the bit. Is there any storylines? I'm gonna go on a limb and say, Kiwi Star. Both teams take 3 points from the round. I think that might be a nice start for Auckland. I think there could be some real headlines, as you said, that'll come out, and it'll be like the days of old, the Ono, Del Piero sort of era out of that derby as well.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. In terms of sellouts as well, we know that Go Media Stadium is pretty close for Auckland and Brisbane. We don't know if it'll quite get over the line, but they're going to have amazing support, and obviously eyes are going to be there for their first game. That's another storyline. There are really lots to choose from. If you look maybe outside of the marquee games, I think Macarthur and Perth is a really interesting football specific game. The story will be on the field. You got Macarthur, who, under Mile Stajovski, are a very defensively resilient and organised side. We saw them in the cup final against Melbourne Victory. They know how to keep teams out. They won that game without Valencia May, and they had one counter attack, and they score a goal, and that's what does it for them. And then on the other side of that, you've got Perth Glory, who under new head coach David Zrilic are coming in with a lot of optimism and enthusiasm, and they're going to run at Macarthur super, super hard, lots of high pressing, a really aggressive, attractive style of football. Is it just going to be Perth pounding away at Macarthur over and over for 90 minutes and then maybe just that one counter-attack that does it, or are they going to be able to break through and Perth maybe score 3, 4, 5 goals? I think that one's really interesting in a football sense, apart from, all the other interesting storylines off the field for some of the other games.
Yeah, certainly. I was just doing some quick maths as we go here, and Go Media is close to sold out. I understand that they're expecting close to a sellout at Gosford as well. I would say Combank will go close to a sellout. We may see a round that will be somewhere around 80 to 90,000, depending if they get a good credit Sky Stadium as well. I think Campbelltown and McDonald Jones might let us down a little bit, but we could be looking at 90 to 100,000 for an A-League round, which would be absolutely phenomenal way to start the season.
It would. And, crowd's one of those things that we love to use as a barometer for success in the league. And, people look at the numbers and sometimes disappointed because it's not quite where the A-League was in its heyday in those kind of late noughties kind of years. And at the end of the day, it's just something that's going to grow over time. So if we can get close to 80, 90, 100,000 in round one, that's absolutely superb. But in the end of the day, it's just a reflection of where we are at the moment. There's nothing really we can do about it now. It's just, putting the foundations in place. So in 10 years' time, those numbers are even bigger.
Well, I think that's the thing. I think I'd be happy to see the bar set high and a really good first round. I don't think that's going to then be the expectation or the rule for the year, but we'll wait and see. 6 really promising games. I find that they've all got an intriguing backstory. And of course, if you do want to find out more about the A-Leagues and keep up to date with more information and news, you can check out the Round Ball Australia podcast, which sees Lockie on there regularly leading the way, as well as a cast of others. I pop in there occasionally, and roundballaustralia.com.au as well, the website for all of your Australian football news. A bit more focused on some opinion and insight as opposed to just recapping what you've probably seen on your Paramount Plus subscription, which you've signed up because we talked you into it earlier on in the show. So we might need to take some affiliate fees there from Paramount Plus. We'll talk to them about that. That might be our first sponsor. But that is the Round Ball stuff. Again, a big thank you to you, Lockie. We really appreciate you coming on. Check out Round Ball Australia. And we'll close the show with a little bit of motorsport action and a special guest joining us to talk F1. As we hit the downhill run of episode 1, we move on from balls to engines, and it's time to dig into some F1 and something that's close to the heart of Australian sports fans, which is where we want to target our conversations. The moving on might be the politest word to call it, of Daniel Ricciardo. He's a cult hero. He's an absolute legend. He is a huge number 1 sporting icon in the motorsport world when it comes to Australia and our fans. And we thought, who better than to get our resident F1 enthusiast and Chris Macpherson show producer J.R. Carter online to talk all things F1 and all things Daniel Ricciardo. JR, was Daniel Ricciardo hard done by?
Look, Chris, I don't think he was. Like, while it's incredibly sad to see him go, and he's been a character around the F1 paddock for close to 15 years now, the writing was on the wall for a few races now. There was some promising signs early in the season with Daniel getting the 4th in the sprint race, but from what Dr. Helmut Marko had sort of been telling the media is that he expected that sort of result from Daniel each week for him to return to that Red Bull seat. The circumstances of his departure are pretty disappointing, however, where he clearly knew that he was leaving after the Singapore race. But for whatever reason, there's been some conjecture as to whether he was denied due to some information around Liam Lawson's contract, or if he's just personally decided he didn't want to talk about it during that weekend. But he definitely knew that it was coming.
From the point of view of the Australian public, obviously Danny Rick was the F1 personality before we had all the F1 personalities that we now know, well, at least a version of them so intimately from Drive to Survive since its evolution, and it reinvented that whole sporting documentary landscape. So I think there's a tinted view in terms of how we view it, and I think in line with what you're talking about in terms of his results got him there. As you said, Helmut Marko may have had a view that he wanted a Hyundai i30 to be a Ferrari, but even Danny Rick can't do that no matter how good of a driver he is. I don't think even Ayrton Senna could have done that. But there's some other implications here too, and it's a little bit juicy too when we think about the rivalry, speaking of Drive to Survive, that we saw between Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris.
That's right, Chris. So with Danny deciding to have a send-off at the end of the Singapore Grand Prix and taking the fastest lap away from Lando, there's been the implication now that if Max were to finish one place behind Lando for the rest of the season, Max can still win the championship no matter what. There's been some great content come out around that. My particular favourite one is the reference to Game of Thrones, where Danny just wants Lando to know it was him, which... Given like the joking side of it, I think the time at McLaren didn't do Danny a lot of favours. He came out a very different driver after that. But he also was able to get their first victory in many years. That's only been claimed by Lando and Oscar this year in their first victories in F1.
Yeah, well, it's certainly one of those pieces. It's a big question mark when you look back with that revisionist history, and it's a wonderful thing, hindsight, to say, well, what would have happened had Danny Rick not gone to McLaren? But I think the bigger question is, where to now for Danny Rick? We know a lot of the F1 seats are starting to fill up for next year. It doesn't seem that's likely. There is talks of other racing, but where do you see him landing? What do you see him ending up doing in 2025?
Look, short term, like we know that we're heading to Austin this weekend, and the information from the media is that Danny won't be attending at Austin in any capacity. So whether that be in the much talked about Red Bull ambassador role that it seems that Christian Horner is really keen to get Danny back into, which doesn't look all that likely at this stage. But where I actually see him fitting in is not in another series. I don't think he'll go to NASCAR at this stage. I think we'll see him head straight back to the media. He was hosting the alternative broadcast with Will on that prior to him returning to AlphaTauri last year. So I think we're going to see a bit more of like the Larrick and Danny Ricciardo coming up in the next few years.
Look, I think that's a burgeoning landscape where we want to see a bit rawer, more alternate commentary. The grandstand was great while it ran with Danny Rick and Will Arnett, as you said, two very humorous sort of characters, having a bit of a laugh and seeing the lighter side of things and adding some fun to what goes on. So we'll watch that space. Aussie fans, though, we don't have to despair completely. Obviously, Oscar Piastri sitting fourth. He's had 2 wins this year. Things are continuing to look up. Is he going to be the next Australian to continue to take this by storm? Or not even the next, he's doing that already. But do we see him, climbing those next 2 or 3 spots on the World Championship ladders?
I think absolutely yes. I think Oscar Piastri has put the right people around him. By having Mark Webber as his manager, he's got the experience backing him to handle some of these inter-team disputes that maybe Danny wasn't as well prepared for. Like we've seen already Lando relinquish a victory because of the way team orders were placed at McLaren. And while there's been now what they're calling papaya rules, again, Oscar was able to take a victory during that time where they said that our focus is Lando. So I think having the right people around him, he's a very different character to Danny, where Danny was like extremely large in life. Oscar's very quiet, but also incredibly dry humour. He's one of the funnier people we're going to see on the paddock. Just some of his reaction shots, I think, are my favourites that I've seen throughout the broadcast of recent time. And not to mention, next year we had Jack Doohan heading to Alpine. And while that is a team in absolute turmoil right now with the revelations from Otmar that have came out during the week, it's just great to see 2 Aussies on the grid at once, and continuing that trend that we've had for the last couple of years.
It certainly is. Piastri looking to become the 3rd Aussie to take out the World Championships. It's been a long time since Bradman Jones took theirs, and obviously the name Doohan is very heavily tied to motorsport and World Championships, with Jack being the son of legendary motorbike rider Mick Doohan. So it'll be great to see. I think from memory, Mick won something like 500cc motorcycle world titles straight. So that's just the bar that we're expecting from Jack once he beds down a bit of time at Alpine and then gets himself into a bit better car. I can't see him doing it at Alpine.
No, I tend to agree. I believe that's just a great place for him to start, though. Like for him to get a start in the sport, that's not a bad way to go. Alpine drivers, or Renault drivers, have had a history in the sport. We've seen Fernando come from there. We've seen Danny have some limited success there, like in getting a place finish.
Well, we'll watch this space. Piastri and Doohan will be the names to watch in 2025. Piastri, even for the remainder of the season, and we hope to see him continue to perform, although it'll be interesting to see how those wonderful things of team orders play out with Norris chasing the championship, but time will tell. It would be such a ironic twist in the tale if it was, thanks to Danny Rick, that he falls short. But we will watch and wait, and we look forward to seeing more of Piastri on Drive to Survive, and hopefully seeing this wash out in Drive to Survive next year. But that is the motorsport. That is our show. That is episode 1 in the books. A big thank you to our producer, JR, to Lockie from Round Ball Australia, who'll be joining us plenty across the show as we continue to evolve and develop. And a big thank you to you for tuning in. Lockie, JR, it's been great to have you both on board. It's been great to get this underway. It's a project we've talked about for a little bit. It's a passion project for all of us, and we look forward to covering lots of sports in a, not the most informed, but certainly not the least informed way over the coming weeks.
Cheers, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.